And then you're gonna know where it is.
The last video was an hour long.
This is a nice thing. The Kehila system was once upon a time really cohesive. So you were just cradled and cuddled by the people around you. So you were poor, there were soup kitchens. You were getting married, you had no money, so they paid for Achnasas Kala. You were sick, there's Bikur Cholim, you died, there's a Kavah Kadisha. Jews take care of Jews. We talked about this morning on the bus, like in the basic forest, what a beautiful thing, how we take care of each other. But you see this in the Kehila system, it was rich and vibrant. And of course, if you didn't toe the line, they would put you legitimately into cherem, and there are different degrees of cherem, but they would ostracize you. And if you were ostracized, today, if they ostracize you, you could just move to Toronto. Who cares, right? It's a free society, free world, but that's a new thing. If you were ostracized then, you would simply move outside the Jewish community, you'd go to the forest, and some random Christian would come and kill you.
Until
They killed you.
And then what happens?
And then when that changed, Rabbi?
Oh, the first person to live outside of any organized, any religious community, Christian Jew in Europe was a fellow by the name of Baruch Spinoza, who is somebody you should know about because he's considered the father of the Enlightenment, not just the Jewish Enlightenment, the general Enlightenment. It's maybe an exaggeration because it was really a wave that was responsible. A lot of historical forces went into the Enlightenment, but he's considered, his ideas are seen as fundamental and really foundational in terms of what the Enlightenment believed in. He showed the world, and certainly the Jews, that you could live a life fine outside of any organized community and survive and actually thrive. In his case, although he did die relatively young, this is probably from inhaling too much glass dust, because he made glasses. Baruch Spinoza, yeah. And he had the chutzpah. Spinoza is somebody you should learn about. But Spinoza had the chutzpah of being somebody who had impeccable midos. It was a Friday with heretical ideas. But he had really impeccable midos, so there was a whole mystique created around him. He's so humble, he's so pure, he never got married. It's interesting, all the major philosophies who were the architects of Western civilization in the modern era, you read a whole long list. Leibniz and Hume and Kant and Spinoza, they didn't get married. They were living this Christian ideal of celibacy, not a Jewish concept, but people perceive that, how pure he is. He's above all human intimacy and all other kinds of mundane things. Gdansk, who's from Gdansk, we saw last year. We went to them this much later, but in the 17th, 18th centuries, we saw the Gdansker Rebbe was the Chai Adam of Avram Danzig,
the Mises Adam?
The Mises Adam, right? Very good. Who came from Gdansk, which is northwest Poland. We didn't get there on the coast, I think. And it was another flourishing community. And his books, Chai Adam, Chochmas Adam, were like the Mishnah Brura of his day.
Yeah.
He's the Chai Adam?
That's say, the Chai Adam.
Interesting points. They say he named the Sefer Chai Adam because he didn't want anybody to make a kitzer, like kitzer Shulchan Aruch, because then you can't make a kitzer Chai Adam. It doesn't sound right.
Well, he was
like
before
a kitzer,
the
mekatzer, the life of a person.
He was before the kitzer, but ironically,
the idea
used him as one of the three primary sources for his rulings in halacha.
Right, but they say there's no kitzer Chai Adam. It doesn't sound good.
I heard the Chai is the one who says that mitzvot kavanah to be fulfilled, right?
He also says that all magic, even sleight of hand, is asur. As Nisa D'Oraisa, and therefore magicians at your kid's bar mitzvah, forget it.
But is it only we see it?
He also, what Avishai made reference to was, he also had a notion, quite reasonably, that on Pesach, what's kitnios? Kitnios, one of the reasons for kitnios, and the Ashkenazi practice not to eat them, is that they're very easily confused with chametz. And maybe you come to think that chametz is mutter if you could eat the kitnios products, right? So he said, there's a certain product that's out there in the world that's awfully similar in terms of its constitution to chametz. What is that, of course? Potatoes. Potatoes. Interesting. Right? And don't know if you know this, but in starving Eastern Europe in those days, the Jews ate potatoes. They had potato omelets for breakfast without the eggs. They had potato sandwiches for lunch without the bread. Right? They ate potatoes. Right? So when they heard on Pesach that he was considering outruling potatoes as kitnios, they said the Chai Adam, the life of man, he's not the Chai Adam, he's the Misas Adam. It's the death of man. And it didn't hold. We eat potatoes and very happily, and all those potato starch cookies that you munch down are fine.
I thought the reason was also because they were
Or you can
stored in the
convert to
same area,
Sfardism.
and
And,
it's another reason.
Are you gonna advertise being Sephardi?
yeah, Chacham Ovadia, it's join the train.
The
It's the place-
Kazakim, there's something about the
it's the way to do
Kazakim.
things. Mashiach's coming. Just kidding, everything's good. They're all good.
Autonomous community
Who was the
orders.
Kazakim? Let's
What's Cherem? I don't know what that is.
Excommunication.
Nothing to happen. One of my
Yep.
favorite
Thank
historical
you.
stories.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Avishai and Yosef certainly know it.
Yep,
He
which one?
wrote the. I mean, he was a Talmud. He was a gadol. He wrote historical accounts, and he was alive during the persecutions of Tachvatat, 1648-49, what we described in the days of the Shach as a major revolution. He appealed. Look, people look for political reasons for revolt. In this case, the Cossacks were aggrieved to the corrupt Polish landlords, not the Jews, who they felt charged them too much, and they were rising up against them, but they couldn't directly attack the Polish landlords. So who's around to attack the Jews? And so that's when these attacks took out. They don't know how many died, 100,000, 800,000, nobody knows for sure. Whole villages were wiped off the map, and the whole ordeal continued for 10 years, even after the raw killings stopped. But then it was followed by poverty and disease, and many, many more died afterwards.
It was all over Europe? Or
No, he was in Ukraine, Galicia, where we were in the first day or so. He reached Poland, and Jews were decimated. The Jewish world was decimated, and he survived against the odds. Rav Yonason of Hanover served against the odds, and he writes about his hashgacha pratis in every instance, how every time he should have died, he didn't die. Some years after, and everybody of that generation read his historical account. Some years later, he was in shul, and he was davening. This is in the 1660s, something like that. And he was in a shul davening in the middle of Shemona Esrei, and a gun, an early version of what we think of as a gun, was shot randomly, not at the Jews per se, but it was shot, entered the shul, came right at Rav Yonason of Hanover. He had the siddur in front of his heart while he was davening. The bullet penetrated the shell of the siddur, went through the pages, into his rib cage, into his heart, and killed him.
That's how it
What's Pshat?
That's not how I thought I was going to finish. I thought it was like, and he bowed from him and flew over and he was okay.
Right, that's why I tell the story and you reacted as I was hoping. Exactly.
What we learned from this, that
what we learned is
when
that
you're
is
supposed
that
to go,
there
you're
is-
supposed to go.
Right, and the power of tefillah is immense, is awesome, and Hashem has His own plans. And when they don't always conform to our picture-perfect Kiruv story of, it's a Hashgacha Prati story, he's saved by the shell of the Siddur, the power of tefillah, I claim it's a perfect Hashgacha Prati story. Hashem does what He wants. If every story ends with the good guys winning, followed by somebody giving you a plate of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies, right? Then people's emunah become very shallow,
We're still waiting for the Coke.
and then people's emunah is built very shallow, and then you go through life such as it is with all the upsets and slings and arrows of outrageous misfortune, and you think, hey, that's not how it ended in all the Kiruv stories, and you're supposed to persevere like a Jew with bitachon.
Hashgacha pratis means everything is detailed. Doesn't mean it's going to be the best.
Right.
God has to
We see the best. It is the best.
Here's what it says. He witnessed the outbreak. He fled Zaslav, where he was living at the time. He never returned. Eventually fled to Venice. Right? Okay. He wrote the Chronicle. He said in 1662, Rabbi Bleiweiss, that's where the Czech Republic is. Probably died to enter soldiers. That's not the account that I read. I read
It
a
looks like
different
maybe
account.
one of these looks like the house of.
Right. This is how they built for the nobility back in the day.
Right, it looks like Pototsky's house.
Yeah. Right. Correctly. Okay.
What makes the Cossacks any more qualified to kill than the Jews in that time?
It doesn't. They were just.
Well,
Just a random group of guys who killed us. There were
How
too
were
many.
they so successful? They were all so poor and just like living in the
They rose up and they had a charismatic leader, and remember his statue still stands today in the center of the city of Kiev in the Ukraine.
And they're not going to take
One man's butcher is another man's
Hey, look, and here he
hero.
is.
Another man's what?
Oh, there's the guy right here. Yamach Shemo. Right, he's a national hero throughout the Ukraine today, whose president is a Jew, with great irony in that.
This is him. This is
Smolensky. Yeah.
Khmelnytsky Medal of Freedom.
Yeah,
He gives out.
he's a national hero. Correct.
For what?
for them, for the Polish people. For the
socialism?
No, Ukrainians.
Today,
Ukrainians.
another quote from Yonason of Hanover. The Cossacks and the Tartars spread out over the kingdoms of Poland, Ruthenia and Lithuania, different names for places. They immediately rebelled against their masters and brutally killed the nobles and the Jews that were found. Meaning the Jews, the Rav Moshe Rivkis writes this. He was the Baragola and the ancestor of the Gra. He says the Jews were caught between their enemies, and everybody killed them.
Quote unquote.
Oh no.
Quotable, quotable quote.
No, wow.
Oh, 100 years.
Call them Yatmi the Yatmi.
Yeah, exactly. The casualties are nonetheless very numerous. Nobody knows that.
He has a very impressive mustache.
Mustaches back in the young,
They came back Yatmi the Yatmi. They were
Orphans
orphans of orphans. It's like there was nobody.
They had the paskin who got the Yerusha, right? Who got the Yerusha when there was no surviving descendants? Yerusha is the inheritance. What do you do with the Gudos whose husband just disappeared off the face of the earth? I mentioned that in the Krakow cemetery that Rabbi Yeshua Heschel was very busy trying to matir al Gudos, trying to free Gudos from their plague. And there are a lot of ways of
This
doing
was
it.
a real, the way they carried them around. This is very evil.
Right. They tortured us. Yeah.
But you don't have to
classic.
deal with anything. Just leave them in the box.
So,
Cement your legs.
So Shabbatai Tzvi, that's when he came in. A lot
You
of
don't have to
people,
deal with it,
it's
just
shocking to
carry it
believe,
in
but he was
box.
people believed, held by him as the Messiah, including some great figures I just discovered. And one of his followers, there were big Rabbanim who were simply wowed by him. And one of the followers was the Chovas Yair of his days, who wrote one of the great, Chovas Yair is Rav Yair Chaim Bachrach, another Yair Chaim. How are we doing?
Yeah, hey, good. How much
we have the cups also.
Were you able to pay for it in my credit card?
he wasn't able to.
I'll take it.
Multi on multi. Wow, Wagner, thank you.
I'll take that. Everybody else.
Wait, where's the diet? Oh, that's the diet. My bad. Sorry.
What about you?
Ask your question again. Ask your question again. It's a real statement. It's interesting.
Let's go see the bracha.
And for some reason, we feel like these few years, it's a short time.
Now
We're
stop.
having like a break.
Now stop, fast forward, and consider the question people asked when we went through Majdanek yesterday. How did the Jews just take this? Why didn't they fight back? Because there's centuries of being worn down and dehumanized. The idea of fighting back was just not in their lexicon. They couldn't think of those.
Why don't we have
terms.
it at a Shabbatai Tzvi? It seems totally normal.
You think we would feel that way if we got?
No, we've been raised in a different time. We feel energized and confident. We have a different attitude. We're Americans.
That's what you told Leo right when you heard on October 7th what happened. You knew that the reaction would not be the Maidanic reaction. It would be, since Zionism, to fight back.
Well, and then sometimes we overcompensate, arguably maybe like the Israeli army, by pounding them. But to what end? What's that going to get other than like you feel good, a little catharsis maybe, but like what are you deal made, but then what? And what are you going to do? What do you accomplish really? Other than you feel good, like we're counterbalancing all of Jewish history now by like showing our enemies that we can fight back for each other.
I can hear the Zion.
Amen.
I can hear the Zion just feeling very proud of them having their own country.
Just come sit, be comfortable.
Protect themselves. That was the biggest problem for decades, for centuries.
Perfect.
They have what to hold on to. The Zionists have what to hold on to because, like, they have a country that
But now
protects
you
them.
can also, in all this, you understand why I'm passionate about history. You don't understand the present, you don't understand the past. And especially our history is so rich but so complicated, and you can't explain what's going on. Zionism and its militancy is very much understood in the context of everything we're seeing here right now.
Correct.
They're rising up against, and they're forming a new person, a new model of a human being.
The scary part is that you can't survive without Torah.
Right, new model of Jew, that's your statement. So Shabbatai Tzvi, what do you want to know?
Why were they so confident?
I think because after this, I mentioned that by the Shach, that Shabbatai Tzvi, the Tachvatat was so unprecedented, and here the Jews were from. In other other persecutions, we had a clear answer: sinas chinam, the philosophy in Spanish Jews, the assimilation. But here you're talking about an overwhelmingly strong community of Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem. Well, how can you explain what just happened to them? And so people turn to the possibility that it was Chevli Mashiach, it was Melchemes Gog and Magog that would predate the arrival of Messiah, and then the world was ripe looking around for who's going to be that messianic figure. Steps into the breach of this figure. Shabbatai Tzvi was nothing if not captivating.
He had Torah. Shabbatai Tzvi wasn't going. Yeah.
He learned some. He had some Kabbalah. He talked a good game. He had better than that. He had a good PR man named Nassim Binyamin of Hanover, of Gaza, from the Jewish city of Gaza, who in Gaza, and at the time, who was a bigger Kabbalist and a good smooth talker, who promoted Shabbatai. It happened over a period of time. We would probably, if we would give him a psychological assessment, we would call Shabbatai Tzvi a manic depressive. He had radical mood shifts. He'd be happy one day, depressed the next day. But he had such an oddness to him, and that initially he was very frum, went to the mikveh compulsively, and it looked like he was doing something special and different. This is before all Hasidus took over these kinds of ideas. It's one of the reasons why Hasidus was so suspicious, because Hasidus looked like a new Shabbatai Tzvi. He was the guy you see like in Kabbalah, and Kabbalah, very good, right? So he looked like, wow, he's the real deal. He's like, he was so different. And then he just went. He was probably got a screw unhinged at one point, because then he started going off the derech and using his averas to prove that he was Mashiach. And so he would publicly it's fine to put it down. He would publicly do acts of immodesty while eating pork chops and wearing shatnas on Yom Kippur, kind of a thing. I'm just embellishing for the effect.
Did you not convert us?
Well, hold on, one thing at a time. And then, but before he would do all these things, he said a bracha. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam hamatir es ha'asur, who permits that which is prohibited. And so if you're watching there, you had two possible conclusions. This guy is stark, raving mad, or this guy is stark, raving mad. It must strangely be true. You know how, like, if it was only halfway there, nobody would have believed it, but he was just such a Looney Tunes that people bought it. And then the word spread, rumors spread that the Mashiach was coming and that the Jews, the lost tribes, were returning from Scotland. They were sailing on a boat with the flags of the 12 tribes. And it was captivating the world. You had a world that was ripe and ready for Mashiach to come. So that was on their side. And he rose up in 1666 and proclaimed, I'm Mashiach. And the Rabbanim of Yerushalayim were not having any of it, so they kicked him out. Like many places kicked him out. So he moved to Gaza and said Gaza is the new Jerusalem, and they were ready to proclaim that. And he came with fanfare and fanciful costumes. He was also very charismatic and sang beautifully Spanish love songs. But he added psukim to them and made them sound somehow holy. And people were mesmerized by it.
Where was he from? Spain?
People were stupid.
Paris?
He was from
Montenegro.
Montenegro. He moved around a lot because a lot of communities.
I told you,
he was from
Yosef.
Smyrna.
Oh, he's amazing.
He was from
That's why
Greece
today
and
all the
Turkey,
Orthodox
and then he was in
people like
Yerushalayim and
That's
Hebron.
the guy called the
In Hebron, he captivated the rabbis. They
Even though
loved
he's
him.
saying the Kabbalah is amazing, I can't do it.
And then he traveled the world.
Look at the very life.
If you're in the yeshivas,
But he was buried in Montenegro. That was my mistake. I mean, in Uxin.
There may be such a tradition. We
And
don't
if
know
I
what
come
happened
to
to
you, I
him.
don't need to become
Really?
25 years
The story
old.
about him is not clear.
Oh, that Islam part.
What happened? Yeah.
At
At one point, he was thrown at
It's
the
hard. I'm not saying anything
sultan.
against it.
The sultan in what was once called Constantinople and today is called Istanbul, but we call it Kushta. The Jews always had different names for the Goyish cities. And the Sultan had just enough of this guy. He was a little bit too uppity, so he had him thrown in prison. But his mystique only grew. And Nassim of Gaza did a really clever thing. This bullying logic, if you can follow this. He said, so when he was thrown in prison, but that's not supposed to happen if you're Mashiach, yeah? That's not part of our narrative, right? So what he said, this is a test for the faithful. So you think, okay, he's in prison, so I got to reject him. He's not really Mashiach. Or you feel like, no, now is the time I have to stand by him extra strong, so I'm part of the inner circle when he really reveals himself. So he wanted to be one of those guys, right? He was like, stood by Shabbatai Tzvi. Then he was converted to Islam. Comes Nassim Binyamin again, and he says, another test for the faithful. And people fell for it. They kept. At one point, he was almost certainly killed off by the Turks quietly, and he kept it going for another. Nassim Binyamin kept it going for another 10 years. That he was a test for the faithful, and he was coming back. You have to know, Shabbatai Tzvi, there were believers for decades in established Jewish communities. It absolutely tore apart the Jewish world. Great rabbis, this is another episode of the 1700s, accused each other of secretly being believers. The Shabbatai Tzvi, exactly. Rabbi Yonason Eibschutz and Yaakov
What really happened there? It's a whole chapter.
I'll give you my Parshanu.
Okay.
It's a huge chapter, and it's not a happy one. It's not one that we tell in curious circles because it doesn't make us look so good. And it's honestly, all this stuff is a big black eye of the Jewish establishment. If you want to know why the Jews were happy to run from Judaism, it was majorly because of the persecution, but it was also because all this undermined the rabbis and the establishment, and people just wanted out. Enough of this nonsense. So, at one point, do you know what McCarthyism was in America in the 1950s?
Yeah, sure.
Paul McCarthy?
Be shy, I'm not asking you.
What was his name? Paul McCarthy?
Not speaking.
Yes, Paul McCarthy, very good. Let him be. No, that's not our Bible.
George McCarthy, I think is his name.
McCarthyism, Joseph McCarthy, the senator who accused everybody of being a communist. Do you know about the Salem witch trials? Right, the Crucible, Arthur Miller. Right, the Crucible, Salem witch trials.
For people like me, I don't know anything.
Where
Is that
there
about Jews?
was there were times in history where people believed, or like the Salem witch trials, they secretly thought that people were witches, and they did magic spells and caused mischief in the community in Massachusetts and Salem.
Right.
And they went around, and people went and to neighbors they didn't like, and pointed fingers at them and accused them of being secretly witches, and the world was so superstitious that it stuck. Similar kind of a dynamic here. People went underground believing, a lot of people believed in Shabbatai Tzvi, but you didn't know who was there, who was who, and so, your own student, wait, maybe you're secretly a father, maybe my wife, if your wife starts acting peculiarly, maybe she really practices Shabbatian beliefs.
Like it's a lifestyle?
It's like Chabad, there's a dynamic there too, because you don't always know who's Messianic, who's not. They hide their cards sometimes. And it's a terrible situation because now you can't trust anybody. So 1748 now, this is almost a century after Shabbatai declared himself Mashiach, and long after he's dead, Rav Yaakov Emden in the northern cities of Altona, Hamburg, and Letzbeck in the north of Germany had his own. There's a whole background to the story. It's a whole complex story, but there were two great rabbanim in this tri-city area on the border with Denmark, of Rav Yaakov Emden and Rav Yonason Eibschutz, who vied for to be the chief rabbi. Rav Yonason Eibschutz had a larger following, and he won. Rav Yonason Eibschutz was permitted, though. In those days, you had to daven in the main shul. You didn't just have breakaway shul. You couldn't just do the Derech thing and go to the mall. Like this, go to the mall. It's no such thing.
Erase that.
No, keep it.
Shut the video.
Rabbi cuts loose.
Anyone that watches 40 minutes in.
We're a little
so
independent.
offended.
We want to do it around ourselves. Anyway, so in those days, I preach to be converted. Right?
Yeah.
In those days, they you had to toe the line, and if not, you put in a Kinea collar, and if he spat on you outside the church, right? Outside the school. Interesting stuff.
Is this an example, or is that actually?
This is an example. It was a real thing, though.
It wasn't.
Yeah, it was absolutely one of my favorites. Thank you.
You couldn't just leave the main community.
So anyway, which tangent am I trying to extract myself from? It's the I was extracting myself from him. It's not that kid. I can do it. Big boy.
Rav Yonason Eibschutz and Rav Yaakov Emden. 1748, right?
So Rav Yaakov Emden had an extraordinary permission because it was Rav Yaakov Emden who wrote the great commentary on the Siddur, and then I quoted him already a couple times.
Moshe.
Yeah, thank you, Moshe. And very generous of you. Thank you for supporting us.
Thank you so much.
Very gracious. So I'll try to be in the concert because we should see the museum. We only have 40 minutes left. So let's go. Anyway, finish the stories like this, and I'll give you my 2 cents. I actually took a class with Dr. Sid Lyman at YU that was extraordinary on this, where we read the literature back and forth between the two. Anyway, he had a printing press in his house, which was extraordinary, and his own private minion that could not exceed 10 people. And on a Thursday morning like this, he clumped in 1748. He clumped the bima after the Kriyas Torah, and he said, "I have here printed, documented in proof that Rabbi Yonason Eibschutz, one of the Gedolei Olam, he didn't say that part, but that Rabbi Yonason Eibschutz is a secret follower of Shabbatai Tzvi.
He's scared.
Now, if one gadol is going to say that about another gadol, we're a mess. And the thing broke open. It was a controversy that racked the Jewish world. The Noda Yehuda down in Prague, we mentioned him too, he tried to come in to make peace, and they started accusing him, you're trying to make peace? You're probably a secret follower of Shabbatai Tzvi. You couldn't win in this one, right? They had to close the business center in Copenhagen across the way in Denmark because Jews were fighting in the streets. Almost certainly murders were committed from one faction against the other faction.
That means one side?
It was a mess, and it was terribly disillusioning because you didn't know. And really, for posterity, what happened. For all intents and purposes, the thing blew over when Rav Yonason Eibschutz died first. And then there's no reason to have war anymore. And ironically, when a decade later Rav Yaakov Emden died, they buried him because he died on a late Erev Shabbos, and there was no time to there was one empty plot in the cemetery, 15 plots down from Yonason Eibschutz. So Pisam Chassidish Torah is that clearly they had made peace in Shemayim, because we wouldn't bury enemies near each other. Right, something to that effect.
What's 15? The
real question for posterity is: was Rav Yonason Eibschutz really a secret follower of Shabbatai Tzvi? History has been kind to both of them, and from our perspective in the Masorah, they're both still Gedolei Olam. We learned Rav Yaakov Emden's Perushim, his commentaries in the back of the Gemara. We learned Rav Yonason Eibschutz. He has the Kreatim Plati, and he has the Yarvis Dvash, and he's quotable endlessly. I do it a lot in history. And they're right, so it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Wait, why?
But why?
How they both made it?
How they made it through? Because we have such a problem sustaining and tradition that this black eye will always undermine us, and there's no toelis. There's no point in casting aspersions. So everybody just hushes it up. But in our class, we read the literature, and it seems pretty clear, at least, that the consensus of the Gedolim believed that he was really a secret follower of Shabbatai Tzvi. He wrote Kameas. He wrote Kameas that had Rav Yonason Eibschutz that had Shabbatai's name in the acrostic. That was the style, and many other writings were unmistakably Shabbatai Tzvi. So the Noda Yehuda felt that he was a Shabbatai Tzvi. He concluded. Rav Yaakov Emden didn't ultimately lead the crusade because he was sort of clearly biased in the subject. So the real leader was the Pnei Yoshua, whose books are among the great books of Achronim, and he led the crusade against him, saying that he was a follower of Shabbatai Tzvi, unmistakably. The Vilna Gaon is young in these days, but in a little bit he wrote about it. It's pretty clear he also felt that he was a follower of Shabbatai Tzvi.
But his Svarim are in Bati Midrashim.
What's also true is certainly some of his descendants were explicit followers of Shabbatai Tzvi.
What about that Rizal?
I used to live next to the base of Dushinsky, and I had a certain Rav there. He always quotes me a var from Yonason Eibschutz.
Everybody does that. And they're wonderful. What's Sinas Chinam, says the Yarvis Dvash from the Rav Yonason Eibschutz. It's all kosher, great Torah, so there's nothing wrong with it, right? Right? He said, what's Sinas Chinam? He said, really what it was the simple Amei Haaretz hated the Talmidei Chachamim because they resented them, they wanted to be like them, and they weren't.
Is there truth to that?
I don't know, but that's what he said.
You can't just make a comment.
Okay, I'm sure he backs it up. Anyway, so this is one of the controversies of the ages, but it shows you how wrapped the world was, and of course then, leaving the Jewish world after Shabbatai Tzvi and after Tachvatat and after Rav Yaakov Emden and Yonason Eibschutz in tatters, and now come along Moses Mendelssohn and then the reformers and saying there's another way. It was the right time.
I can't blame them. I would become.
Look at our world as it is. Let's go see the museum.
I would become
Rabbi.
That has to be one.
Yosef's reaction, understandably, is that's insane that Rav Yonason Eibschutz is a follower of Shabbatai Tzvi. I did not say those words. I'm not sure about it till today, even though these Gedolim seem to have been persuaded, but I think there's enough room for doubt. The thing that's kind of incriminating is he wrote, after all the attacks, a book defending himself, and the defense is not so strong. But okay, I go with the world consensus. It doesn't matter, and let's not dwell on it. And certainly no reason to tell people these stories. Yeah,
Question.
Is Shabbatai Tzvi, the postscript is his descendants and his followers formed a group called the Dunma. They still believe that he's Mashiach, and they mostly live in Turkey, but they have conventions in Washington, D.C. annually, and they're around and they're forcing
Like Muslims.
Yeah, they're like Muslims, exactly.
But they're still around. It's the same.
All right, Rabbi. Look at this.
Oh, sure.
How are you?
Rabbi, is this a recreation? What is this?
A recreation. It's a recreation. Have you been? You're encouraged to go to the Israel Museum. Y'all know you've been to the Israel Museum where they have several transported or recreated shuls from Jews around the world, and you saw the care and love they put into building their holy shuls.
Explaining this whole thing.
I want to know what it is. What is it? Okay. You were here?
No, I had to do something and then it came.
You went fine, great. Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, this is quite stunning, right? Yeah, if anybody spots it, this is where this is from. Let's see the gap. No, this is describing what the different facets are. You see, but I want to know where this is from.
My legs hurt.
Oh, let's see. Maybe this is it.
That's already the next example.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay.
It's unfortunate.
I'm trying to figure that out.
Yo, is this it?
Quote.
Express the uniquely Jewish yet distinctively regional character. This is what the shuls were like. And remember, these people are poor and they poured all their financial resources into the shul, forms and shul techniques. So it's not a replica of one particular. Oh no, the wooden shul was built, most likely built in 1640. Renovation doesn't say where that is, but someplace in Poland.
Basically, the second room.
Jewish custom by the door.
Can I ask a question about something before?
Yeah.
Why was everyone so confident with the Shabbatai being in Scotland?
Oh, just
Everyone?
Scotland represented in people's minds the four corners of the earth.
Wait.
Right, that the tribes are going to come back from the four corners.
Everyone, Rebbe? Who?
What?
I never heard of this. The
There were rumors that the Jews were sailing from Scotland to illustrate that idea.
Okay. Who knew?
I always think like why we didn't go through all the crusades. We're just down here again.
So now the museum is going to emphasize the new phase in history after the tumultuous 1600s. So we have this phase in history of the Enlightenment taking over and moving in for the king. That's the more contemporary 1770s. After the Vad Arba Aratzos is already disbanded and Jews are a little bit more integrated in non-Jewish society, and they mentioned here, I saw this, that there was a mention to Kant and other philosophers as having an unusual influence on Jewish thinking.
Who is Kant?
Immanuel Kant was a philosopher who, to a large degree, people associate him with the outsized individualism of the modern man. And it's more complicated than that. It would take several hours to get into what Kant stood for, but he had a huge impact on modernity. Okay.
On modernity?
Yeah.
The period till now was
feminine roles?
The modern concepts, modern world, modern ideologies.
Sounds like nature.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's Franz Joseph I.
Yeah, that's Franz Joseph I. We mentioned him on the first day. Remember the Edicts of
I
Tolerance?
know these things.
Right? The Edicts of Tolerance were the first time the Jews were not contained in their ghettos.
What was her name again? Henrietta? Maria something? Maria Teresa?
She was a big anti-Semite. Joseph was a little bit unclear what his agenda
the Edicts
was.
of Tolerance, right?
On the one hand, he seemed to be giving the Jews many more liberties than they had previously. On the other hand, what was his agenda? He also was not in favor of the Jews maintaining the traditions, the Lashon Kodesh. He wanted them to learn the Tanakh in Hungarian and other kinds of decrees that were, and he also issued a draft against Jews that they should serve in their army.
This is an interesting figure. He was emperor for like 50 years or something.
Yeah, there's a story about Maria Teresa. Remember this one, the Noda Yehuda, who's in Prague at the time, the great Rav, and the breakout of the Enlightenment. There was an assimilated Cohen whose son fell for a divorcee.
Great story.
It's a great story. You know this? His son fell for a divorcee, and listen to the test. His son fell for a divorcee, and
Listen to the slide. Good story.
and they brought the Gadol Hador. They wanted the chief Rav. They were all about pomp and circumstance. They wanted the authority. You're going to officiate at this wedding. So the Noda Yehuda calmly tried to explain that that's against Torah law. A Kohen is not permitted to marry a divorcee. But the man was not having any of it, and he got angry and he screamed at the Noda Yehuda, "You will see on my words that you will officiate at this marriage." A few days passed. Carriage came with the orders of Maria Teresa herself, demanding that the Noda Yehuda preside at this wedding. And the Noda Yehuda responded, "You can tell the Empress that I'll be there." Everybody's astounded. What's going on? He's capitulating to the other side. He's going to give in to the reformers. And all the reformers, all the maskilim, the new enlightened Jews, were all thrilled. They all rushed to this wedding to see, wow, he's going to perform this marriage. And the new groom was such an ignoramus, such an amaretz, that he didn't know how to say Hareat Nekudeshesli B'Tabatzu, you're betrothed to me with this ring. So he had to repeat after the Noda Yehuda. And the Noda Yehuda gave him the words, fed him the words. He says Hareat Nekudeshesli B'Tabatzu, Al Das. What should be the end of this sentence?
Moshe Yisrael.
Moshe Yisrael. Al Das Malkas Maria Teresa.
Okay, so everybody's
And I
like,
got
what?
Al Das Maria Teresa. I hereby pronounce you civilly wed. Because essentially he was being forced to perform a civil marriage, which means nothing. So it's not going against halacha. And that's what the Kohen wanted. It's certainly not a halachic marriage, it's a divorcee. And his clever way of getting around the decree without endangering
there's a
himself.
continuation. And then she said, they told her it's not a real marriage.
Yeah.
You have to say, Moshe Yisrael. So he said that, you wanted me to perform this wedding. Moshe doesn't let you said I should do it. So she said, oh, now I get what's happening here. They're forcing you to do something you're not allowed. And she aborted it and she let him go.
I'm suspicious of the ending of the story because she was not so kind.
What is this thing over here? Wait. Who did this thing over here? There's something from this.
Look,
Transition of the Jews.
I mentioned this on our first day that the Joseph II, her son, had issued what's called the Edicts of Tolerance. That in 1780, that was the first time the Jews could read the Steppen Wall and they go to university, and there were new liberties, and wow, a whole new age. But we already hear this skeptically, and we realize, this is the seeds of destruction in the form of enlightenment, and the Jews getting out of their circles. He also said they shouldn't use Hebrew; they should learn the Bible in Hungarian. And he drafted the Jews.
But it said that they were now.
Let's see.
Instead of having legal protection,
It's a mixed thing. We don't know. They had individual settlements with absolute monarchies within them, and therefore, in a sense, they were citizens in a great way. Citizens also made them more, let's say, austeriary than the Jewish. They wanted to separate from the Jews. Let's continue and see some of the golden. Apparently, there's a whole nice section here about Volozhin. Hey, this is singing my song. As we've been doing, if anybody sees a choice, it is overwhelming always museums, but if you see something that needs commentary, by all means, just bring it out. What do you see?
What is this one?
You have a brave new world. All these technological advancements, the whole cultural advancement. The Jews are always the smartest people in the class, and they were curious intellectually, and they explored the new. You have Jews in virtually every area of life at the cutting edge of theater, of music. We mentioned the Moses Mendelssohn's grandson was Felix Mendelssohn, one of the great composers. And it was intoxicating, and many just couldn't really resist the allure of the new. They've been held back in the shtetl so many centuries that all this was hard to resist.
Is this like close to that
Yeah, I mean, you always, what I said about the Lansut Shul, that it had clear influences of the church. In the surrounding cultures, you're not immune. You're going to see stuff the way the Christians do it, and you're going to do it also. So all these images having the animals in there also is not entirely a Jewish thing. It may not be also.
Yeah, but like, what if I wanted to copy that for like a holy moment?
What?
I don't think there's an Isser. I don't think there's an Isser B'davar.
I like
Although
the style.
I think there's a problem because the lions are depicted in three-dimensional ways that maybe you might not ask a shaila in terms of Hilchos Avodah Zarah.
What do you mean? You could just wipe out the face and I thought it's good.
If it's three-dimensional, it's much more problematic than having it two-dimensional. Right? Because maybe it was a pestle.
Over here,
It could be worshipped.
this is very critical.
Yeah, what do you have? Let's see. Wedding guys seldom have experience. So you remember the embarrassment. You see me the next day after entering the holy matrimony. It seemed to me as everyone was impatiently waiting for me to appear, and then only they could shower with cynical jokes. The blood kept rushing to my head and reddened my pale cheeks.
We were praising, we praise the Chassan Kala.
But maybe the Parshanut on it is, I would say that maybe because now the world's overly modernisha, and in modern circles they look down on these traditional things like weddings. You know, they're making fun. I was at a very liberal non-Orthodox wedding once, where all they did instead of giving Divrei Torah about the godless and the chasta, they told everybody got up top and used to stand up comic, and they all told jokes about the rabbi, about the groom and the bride. Right, and it reflects that influence. It's the holy thing, but you hear it's fine lines like that. You're modern tradition, you know.
That's so sweet.
Oh, well, it's advanced.
No, it goes this song.
It's hard for Jews to resist this. You know, you want the money, you want.
Oh no, I don't have a picture. I don't have a phone anymore.
Always get caught in the most awkward moments on your phone.
It's not my fault.
They
said hooray out.
I'm married.
Well, it's they never do it because they don't embarrass the process. Sometimes they have to solve it glasses. The custom goes like this, and it's first they put a kerchief down there, and they do it, and it's really like a.
He's giving a hand to who? Oh, wow, so nice.
Okay.
Giving a hand to who? Oh, so nice.
I'm so confused.
I can't read not Polish and also not English, so you have to guess.
Wait, what? Yo, isn't this just a Hasidus custom?
What is it?
For the Jewish woman, marriage men having to submit to the ritual of having her hair cut off.
Yes, Satmar.
Yeah, that's just no, and Newspaper
Wait.
does it.
But that chronologically that doesn't make sense because it, what?
Having to submit to the
I got a
ritual.
question.
Yeah, this is confusing.
Yeah.
Let's see, Moshe, what do you have? For a Jewish woman, marriage men having to submit to the ritual of having her hair cut off and putting on a cap, which therefore, there were certain very exceptional isolated women around Hungary. That's why you see certain Hungarian women who have their hair either cut off or shaved. But that's not normal.
It's just Hasidish.
Certain very, very exceptional Hasidim. Most don't do that. They do cover their hair, and sometimes it's more practical if you don't have long hair to cover it. So that you could do that, but it wasn't required by in most circles.
Interesting.
Yeah, but it doesn't seem like everybody does it.
Yeah, it's not accurate.
כמה וכמה צרות וראוס נדמה לנו המחלוקת שהתחילו בימי הריבש, הגר"א והרמב"ם.
Harambam?
Rambam.
Stay.
I don't know what they're trying to.
Rambam man.
No, that's what they called Moses
He's the
Mendelssohn.
Harambam man.
Oh.
What?
Not the Ramban, it's Rav Moshe Mendelssohn.
So that's the machlekes in between.
I mean, who's the author of this? This is a Maskil himself writing this.
Right.
As if the Gra debated Mendelssohn, which he never did. He just simply stood forward against it.
He calls it hamachlekes.
Because that's how you can frame it. You can frame it that way for their benefit.
Harambaman.
It looks like
amid the others fast asleep.
Volozhin here. The Volozhin has to kill himself. God, and
We talked about Volozhin this morning, right? 1936. Okay.
Volozhin, like, if everyone knows, they had a 24-hour. I'm pulling out my phone.
This picture is debated if it's authentic or not. It's meant to make the film.
Right.
Notice also, one thing that's probably authentic, the tefillin were much smaller in those days. Only rich people could afford our kind of tefillin.
Right.
In Europe, that was a luxury.
Today, the smaller ones.
But it's harder to read as well.
So this is
I'll show you this. Like, I don't know if we saw it.
Oh, I didn't know if you said that.
No problem. We gotta go soon.
I know. What else? What else you see, Sammy? What else would you alert to?
There's like a whole place.
Did we miss something back there?
I think you cover everything over there. But
Let's keep going. Okay, let's see. Lubavitch.
Oh, the Bobby's also got a whole wall?
Well, yeah. Look, they are an influential group. It makes sense in such a museum that they would you know, they say to Moshe when he put up resistance against the last Lubavitch Rebbe, that when you go to Olam HaEmes, the Gra is going to give you a great handshake for your efforts. And he said, the Gra is not the only one that's going to give me a handshake in Olam HaEmes. The Balatanya is going to, because he felt that he was turning over his grave at the excesses of later Chabad.
Right.
This is meant to show us the Hasidic without really explaining the even context. But okay, I don't know if we can do that complicated topics in a museum.
This museum is a Jewish museum.
The Hasidic revolution is so immensely important and yet complicated.
You know what? This train never got to the destination.
They can't really do it. What do you have?
No, it's always stupid.
Okay, this is everything unfolding. We mentioned before who built the intercontinental railroads, the Rothschilds. Unintentionally building the destruction of European Jewry, the Nazis used. Modernity breaking in.
The train is not moving. The bridge is moving. So the train is still stuck.
Yeah.
Something very cool, by the way, is that a little bit over there.
The train never got to the destination. The train is not moving.
As if it was in, we were in that.
The bridge
Let's see.
Okay, let's go explore.
That's
It's a very cool reconstruction. There's a lot of more construction. Show some more for the There's a little bit.
It was a thriving Jewish center.
This museum or
No, well, it's overseen. The curator's a liberal Jewish lady, you know. So it's Jewish in the guise of more of a lady who's the curator's in charge of it, and there are other people too. But the people here are not, who preside over, are not from. They don't come from our hashkafa. So they'll portray things not necessarily treif, not problematic, but more like a Jewish museum.
Also, people that don't know Jewish or of interest.
No, that interest much like, you know, people in America go to Chinatown for Chinese food.
Oh,
It's
yeah?
a cultural interest, but we also suggested that you know, you had Jews such a central part of the Polish landscape for centuries, who were a vital part of its infrastructure, of its economy, and suddenly 12 years pass and they're gone, leaving this gaping hole and mystery. And now, this was only built in 2014, now there are people who are intrigued. Who were these people who lived in our midst? What is their story? And they can only really do injustice to the story because as we talked about these last several days, it's so incredibly complicated that even insiders sometimes have a hard time grasping all the dimensions. Of who?
It looks like the church a little bit.
It does. Well, now you have the breakout of modernity, and Jews were always excellent in all areas. So Heinrich Gratz was a historian, once upon a time a student of Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, neo-Orthodox in Germany, from Frankfurt, but he was a guy who went off to Derech. Not entirely, though, and he wrote one of the early modern histories of the Jewish people. It's a phenomenal accomplishment, but and this is what's tricky about it, it's laced with haskalah, with academic kinds of leanings in the way he renders certain things in history. Because history is the most open subject in the world. It all depends on what the historian's perspective is, and what his hashkafa is, and what he teaches. So there are all kinds of problems with Gratz's approach, influenced by the non-Jews and by modernity. And Rav Hirsch renounced him. He said, "You're not my student." He wrote. What's that?
The quote's very problematic.
What does it say? I am both a Polish and a Jew. I want to work for God, for both of them. He eventually moved. He was part of what was called historical Judaism, founded by Zacharias Frankel in Germany, and actually what's today Western Poland, in a place called Breslav, in the Jewish Theological Seminary of Breslav, that moved to New York and became the Jewish Theological Seminary. Today, it's the flagship of conservative rabbinic school. Right, so he's one of the forerunners of conservative, which back in the day looked like modern Orthodox, but it was laced with all kinds of kfira, all kinds of heresy. And you'd read Gratz and you'd think he's a from guy. You wouldn't always pick up on the nuances. That's what's kind of dangerous about it. In a sense, sometimes it's better to go to secular university and hear outright kfira that you can identify. But sometimes you go to YU and you hear one of the Bible instructors teaching you things that sound like they could be okay, and you don't know how to argue with him, right? But then, he's going to brainwash you, and before you know it, you're like, you're Shabbatai Tzvi follower.
That part to knock out.
It's very dangerous. Very dangerous.
Or maybe synagogue from Mackey. I don't know how to identify that. Museum of History. Yeah, and what's the insight?
That building Jewish shoes is really a sign of openness and really modernity.
Well, it does. I mean, I had that comment much less drastically. This is very much in the model of the church. That's how Reform built their schools. It's all churches. The Reform rabbis all had powdered wigs, like Christian clergy. They had mixed choirs. They had they didn't have mixed seating yet. Women had to sit up in the balcony gallery.
Why did they bother to be Jewish?
They imitated the church, and the Reform, people have a misunderstanding of what Reform was. It started in Germany, and they think the Reform was a path out of Judaism. The early Reformers claimed that they were trying to staunch the flow of Jews who were leaving Judaism for Christianity in droves, and they said we're trying to create a modern Judaism, a Reformed Judaism to keep the Jews in the fray. Not realizing that, of course, they're facilitating their step by step out of Judaism. Could have been, but conservative was much later development. Conservative started as historical Judaism in the 1844 in the Braunschweig Conference, and eventually really didn't take off in Germany at all. It took off in the turn of the century, in the early 20th century in America, which is much more suited for it. The conservative movement in the early 20th century was over 50% of American Jews, because it looked like modern Orthodoxy. It still retained tradition, which most American Jews were.
Conversions were.
But this is the catch. This is the fly in the ointment. They said that everything in Torah and tradition has to stay, except those things that what they call Catholic Israel, universal Israel, the Jewish people can't sustain it. So if we can't sustain it, we can let it go. And they felt, the founder, Zacharias Frankel, felt that most of Torah and Halacha could be sustained. He did away with Yom Tov Sheni Sogalios. He changed ever so slightly the liturgy. The critics said, once you start with these kinds of cosmetic changes, it's a slippery slope, you'll never get out of it. If you study, and I do this in my class on the subject, you study the history of conservatives, exactly what happened. Then they started tinkering with other kinds of halachas. By the 1950s, they were permitting driving to shul on Shabbos. By the 1980s, they were ordaining female rabbis. By the 2000s, they had gay rabbis. Then they got away with the whole concept of mamzerus. And now it's indifferentiable from Reform. They held themselves to be the non-Reform, the traditional. That's why conservative.
We see, in a certain sense, modern Orthodoxy in itself is now becoming split where they're leaning to the right.
You have the
some
open
areas.
Orthodox. You have Rabbi Weiss's place in Uptown West Side.
How many of them are
And he started his own not YU rabbinic program. He doesn't call them rabbis. He calls them what's the
No, he does call them rabbis. The rabbinites.
No, they don't call rabbinites.
That's different. So he gave smicha to
women,
Sarah,
does it all
to
halakhically.
Sarah
He has
something.
a posek that writes all the chuvas, but it's very much
Yeshiva Maharat, Rebbe, Yeshiva Maharat. Maharat, Yeshiva Maharat.
So try to become into a room. You should learn from history.
Yeah. And then you had the outbreak of Zionism.
I want to know about the
Zionism was
joint.
intoxicating. Initially, as we said this morning, it was a religious movement, the Chovei Tzion, that was taken over by the secular. I didn't say that there were certain religious rabbis who stayed on. Initially, Rav Shmuel Moliver from Bialystok and Rav Yaakov Yitzchak Reines and others hoping to influence the secular from the inside. Rav Kook would later on take that role. And that's the early underpinnings of what we think of as Dati Leumi, the national religious movement. So, but the majority of the Gedolim stepped away, and were strong critics of the movement as a force of assimilation. Can't live in Eretz Yisrael if you're not going to keep the mitzvahs.
The name, the joint.
The big stick.
So now they're merging all kinds of things. There's so many stories here and so much commentary. Of course, we're almost out of time, but yeah, right. We could go on it for a few more hours. Although I may fall over at one point. You hear my voice, right? Okay, on the Jewish street. Okay. And the tides have changed. Scary tides have changed. World War I was devastating for the Jewish world. The yeshivas fell apart. The Bolsheviks in Russia made religious Jewish practice illegal, and many heroic stories. The second to last Lubavitcher Rebbe tried to save as much as he could in Russia. He was on the run for his life. The Heilige, all these names I'm throwing out. I told the story in Dallas. Dallas was a stronghold from Rabbi Greenwald. Help me with. I'm swimming in all these different topics we're talking about. The offshoots of the Muslim movement, the big yeshivas were Slobodka and Navardik. Navardik Rebbe, I'm trying to say. Navardik Rebbe. He survived. He spread Torah. Between the wars, there were more Navardik yeshivas all over Europe than any other movement. And they're basically they moved from Navardik to Bialystok.
Stipler started off there.
Also, Stipler, right? Stipler was there. Chaim Shmulevitz was there. A lot of Gedolim started in Navardik, and they built this in Navardik up the street from Or Sameach, a branch of theirs.
No.
Navardik was one of the great Muslim yeshivas, and we talked about it extensively last year. Yeah. Well, it's not. These are not rabbis.
Navardik is asking the librarian for a sandwich.
What are those?
Yeah.
That one's got payas.
Yeah. Hold on. Oh, I'm wrong. There are a couple of more rabbis. The likely increase of central powers. Okay, is unity both powers?
These look
The last guy was reformed. At the end, the picture.
Yeah, he looks reformed. Okay. Look, their times are desperate now. And,
They said that the Reform rabbis look like Christians.
Bible is really uncertain.
Juden. Schmidt for the listing. 11 the Zoom.
Oh, this is the museum? Yeah. You can see some of these stills in the introduction to Yad Vashem of Jewish life in the early 1930s. And it was a complicated world. Most of the Jews were off the air at this point. The big cities were usually bad for religion because people could easily become anonymous and do their own thing, even if on the surface they could look like they were religious. But today we call it the kosher phone that they give out, right? But the smartphone in the glove compartment, kind of a Jew. So you had a lot of that emerging in modernity because you can kind of lead a double life much more easily, especially in the big city. The village they were from, more transparent. That was good for Yiddishkeit.
The Freedom Miller has a whole book about the fact that the show happened because most of the Jews are not released right now.
That's what a lot of the buildings say, and nobody wants to hear it, but that's a lot
Nobody says that,
of...
so
We don't
that's
believe it's not just Victor Miller. Many of the people that look, it was anticipated. You look at the Or Sameach himself in his commentary on the Chumash in the Meshech Chochma, he writes by the Klala and the Chukosai, people look to Berlin for their salvation because Berlin was at the cutting edge of all modern innovation, and the Jews were holding by it, and they said Berlin is Yerushalayim, and beware, because from Berlin, he wrote 50 years before Berlin became the Nazi central command, the ill winds will blow from Berlin.
In Hebrew, what's that?
When Rabbi Salanter, the head of the Muslim movement,
Ruach Ra.
after the Reform Conference in Braunschweig in 1844, he said that the Jews now permit intermarriage with non-Jews. It will be as a mida keneged mida. Hashem will punish them, and it will be the official law that the non-Jews will outlaw intermarriage with the Jews. And exactly 90 years later, the Nuremberg laws were posted that indeed Rabbi Salanter predicted that, and 90 years later, the predictions came true.
That's what they say. If the Yid doesn't push the guy away, so Hashem makes the guy push the Yid away.
What was that line? Bleiweiss, what was the line of this Salanter? What did he say?
After the 1844 conference in Braunschweig, the Reform Conference, they decided that intermarriage was acceptable. You could be married to a goy or a goya and be a Jew. That was official in the Reform, and he said when they came out with that decree, Baruch from the Shemayim said that the goy will come out with their decree, that the goy will not be able to marry Jews. And indeed, 90 years later, in the Nuremberg laws, that's what was one of the laws.
Does that mean that we're not supposed to live in Israel?
What?
Does that mean that we're not actually supposed to be living in Israel, and that's why we're getting such a hard time to live there?
You can understand why I would take that as a complete non sequitur. What?
Yeah, how does that
What?
relate?
Because
What's
it's
the
the challenge
logic?
of our generation.
To live in the modern state because it's so secular? That idea?
No, the fact that we have so many obstacles, and people think it's morally questionable for us to live there.
No, that's a different issue. That's maybe you're talking about the Satmar approach to Zionism. If it's a violation of the 3 O's, that idea?
More of the other nations.
The nations will look at the independent Jewish state and use it as an excuse for anti-Semitism. There is such an idea, yeah. Especially when they're not keeping the Torah. Hashem promises this: if we don't keep the Torah properly, then the nations will attack us. If we do the right thing, then that will keep us instead in a good, proper way. I'm going to move quicker through the Holocaust piece because we can do that another time. We really don't have time. I guess it's stupid. We should be outside. We just went to his kever, Adam Chernyakov, the head of the ghetto of Warsaw. Are we going into the Warsaw Ghetto? Dinner first, and then we'll end by the Warsaw Ghetto.
I missed the beginning. When was the first time that we knew that was given in Europe, the first display? Sorry for jumping.
No, it's okay. That's okay. We don't really know. There's a story that's told in a couple different sources about the center of Judaism in the times of the Gaonim was in Baghdad, and there's a story, a legend that's told in a couple contradictory accounts called the Four Captives. That was, as it were, the idea that the Torah started spreading around. Initially in the Mediterranean basin in Tunisia, the father of the Rabbeinu Hananel, of Hushiel, and in Spain and in Italy, and that signifies the now spread of Torah. And where there's Torah, the Jews will follow. And then we see the Jews, and we have records of Jews in Italy, in the times of the Gemara, in Spain.
Wait, after the Churban, people left everywhere?
People were scattered in the four corners, as it were. Europe became a modern center of Torah, particularly in the last millennium. In the last 1,000 years, this became the largest majority of Jews in the world. There were mostly Sephardi Jews or Jews living in Muslim-ruled lands in the Middle East, in North Africa, but they were on the fringe more. They weren't, and the numbers were not so great. The Ashkenazim used to be much larger, and Holocaust decimated them. Okay, I'm not going to drop there.
This museum is huge.
It's huge, right? Overwhelming. So much to see. There's only so much to take in, but we did certainly an admirable job.
A lot of money. Yeah. The fortune was a kilo as well, right? What's your portion gonna be?
What is killing me?
That one?
It's a pause.
We're going up. Why we're going up? Because we went down.
Dead end.
Okay, dead end.
Oh, how do we get here?
I don't know.
We don't like that ends.
Dead end. Oh, here we go.
Oh. I'm getting a bit dizzy. You're supposed to ask. Someone had a word. Yeah, we saw everything live. Something that makes sense.
What? This is very confusing.
Trying to get out of the Holocaust, they won't let us.
Oh no.
Let's have some.
It's on recording, Rabbi.
Oh no, I'm in trouble.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. That was helpful, Sammy. We did a whole survey, so.
I figured my way out.
That's how we became a tour guide. You lost him enough times and you start to know your way around.
Exactly.
No, I mean, there's an Auschwitz exhibit.
No, I don't want that.
This is so confusing.
We're lost in the Holocaust.
I mean, the trip's basically over. Wait, does that mean that we can say whatever we want? Almost? Like when we get on the plane, we can say whatever we want?
And this is already the communists are here. That's Lech with us and the rise up against the communists.
I know that guy.
And we heard the story this morning about the, not much of a story about them.
Sure.
You know that guy?
Yeah, it's Stalin.
Yeah.
He's a cool guy.
I know. Exciting. How does someone design this place?
Wow, history is...
Doesn't that look like the exit?
Oh.
From the exhibition. This is where the bathrooms are.
Uwaka. Is that it? Is this also part of the tour? I think it's part of the tour.
Anyway, if there's a takeaway, what I was just saying, and now I'm on video officially, is saying that you want sooner than late, rather than later in your life, to go through the whole narrative arc of history, from Bereshit Bar Elokim to the modern day, and even back to the Mashiach. Obviously, this is a plug for my own stuff, but there are better people out there than me that you can certainly find. I'll tell you, I'll keep a couple recommendations. If you're looking for audio files, one of my favorites is Shmuel Irons from Detroit, who has not just a history series, but his are, if you think I'm dry and boring, but his are on the highest level. He takes out books and reads from them. So for geeks like me, I'm in heaven, right? But for like an average ADD adult guy, so like he like wouldn't be able to follow. But you see, he brings primary sources, and so it's really authentic history. You know, he doesn't just say that the Ramchal was pursued. He gives you the play-by-play what happened and how the letter from one of his admirers got in the hands of certain rabbis in Italy, and that's why they condemned the Ramchal through no wrongdoing of his own and chased him out of Italy to Amsterdam. The Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, the Mesilas Yesharim, and the right. So anyway, the real pitch is that you should see the whole piece because it's all one narrative that explains how we got into this messy situation that we're in today, and it'll inspire you endlessly to be your best. Hopefully this tour gave you some of that too, the sense of, wow, I'm just part of this dynamic, awesome people. It's all so clearly supernatural. It's all from Hashem, and we are the historical people. We believe that history has a beginning, middle, and end, and that's radical because most of the world believes that history repeats itself, and you're stuck, and good luck, and you're never going to get out of your quagmire, your difficulties. We don't. We're the world's eternal optimists. That's why Rabbi Akiva laughed when he saw the fox coming out, because he said, if there's a bad part, there's definitely going to be a good part too.
Yeah.
Thank you, Abby.
So are we on?
Yep.
So this is what I was describing. The Zionist artists you see all over the country. They have models of this. This is arguably one of the most famous, Natan Rappaport, who painted a new ideal, very much in the Zionist mystique, of the muscular. This is not the classic image of the pale, weak yeshiva bacher that the Zionists loathed, but the muscular Jew looking on and up in history, right? Defying their oppressors, right? That's typical of Rappaport. It's typical of the secular vibe of the power of my hand did this for me. We don't need Hashem Shalom. They say we don't need Hashem. We can do this ourselves. We'll drain the swamps. We'll carry arms. We'll defend the Jewish people. Give me a second. Coming back to that in a second. What's that a big story?
You, after the war, only living on the land.
What is this, like the typical Jew?
Like on themselves.
And then this is the depiction, the Zionist depiction of the poor, bedraggled, persecuted religious Jews. Of course, even they had to get Muslims, right? With carrying their sacred Torah to their death, to their doom.
Dressed.
Right? As they passively, like sheep to the slaughter.
Not dressed.
And they're dressed, right?
Not dressed.
These ones are.
Dressed.
These
And
ones
of course,
look dressed.
The most singular figure is the child, who hopefully, according to Rappaport's implication, will find the light of kibbutz life and secular socialism as the redeeming virtue of the future, right? And that's
the whole story.
It's not true. I'm pretty sure if we know it's not true.
right. Oh, I see. Yeah, you probably have to put that into. We don't hold by Rappaport, but at least it gives you a sense of what we're up against and what the sincere belief is. You know, when the Zionists kidnapped, and we don't know the number exactly, it sounds like a conspiracy theory, but at least some of this is true. When they kidnapped the babies, the Yemenite babies from the hospitals in the 1950s, and took them away from their traditional families, and told the families that they had died, and they took the liberty of burying them without the families as a chesed, so the families went home simply counting their losses, while the children were taken to secular socialist Zionist kibbutzim to be raised as good Israelis. And it's a shocking story. Go fact check me. I'm not making it up. And but it actually illustrates they were doing it idealistically. They really felt the Torah world was leading all of the Jewish people into darkness and to endless persecution, and that only through, like Herzl's dream, having a state, having independence, having an army, will we find any salvation. As Bibi Netanyahu said in the March of the Living in 1997, while he was defense minister, he got up and he told all these impressionable kids, he said, as defense minister of the state of Israel, I can guarantee you that the Holocaust will never happen again. To which we look back and we think, how was October 7th for you, Bibi? חסוך זרוע קודשך וקרב קץ הישועה לקרוב נגמר דם עבדיך מיום השעה Ki
Shabbatai